That's
Yes, yes. I'll tell you all about it. I'll tell you all about it.
Good evening. I am really pleased to introduce to you this evening the Venerable Rosalyn Elm, who is the Archdeacon for Indigenous Ministries and for Healing and Reconciliation for the Diocese of Huron. She's also the rector of the Parish of the Six Nations of the Grand River, a parish that I had a lot of back and forth with through the years when I was still in Huron, and still have quite a few friends on that parish. Roz was born in Oneida of the Thames First Nation in Southwold, Ontario, which, if you're not all that familiar with that part of the province, is just south of London and Strathroy and north of Shedden along the Thames River. And just realized this afternoon as I was thinking back through time that for much of her growing up time in the Diocese of Huron, one of my classmates from Huron would have been her rector, the Reverend Gay Whitney.
Yeah.
You were educated at Huron.
Yes, I was.
A Master of Divinity from Huron University College. And one of the things that caught my imagination this afternoon was learning the meaning of Roz's Oneida name, the shaker of the leaves. And that's been precisely my hope for this evening, is that she would shake us up a little bit and get us to give some fresh new thought to the ongoing need for healing and reconciliation, and perhaps some ideas on fresh new ways that we can go about effecting that and building communities of trust. So Roz, thank you so much for coming. I know it has been a lot for you to come up here today.
Yes, about 2.5 hours. First of all, I also want to introduce our missioner of Indigenous Ministries for the Diocese of Huron, Reverend Hannah Skorar. We were both educated at Huron. I'm just a year ahead of you. Yes. Yeah, just a year ahead of you. So we also teach at Huron, and so I knew that I had to leave right after class to come here. And so we came to the school together because if you know, parking at any university is going to be crazy. So we both came together. So I said, you know what? You just might as well come with me. Just find out.
So that's how I ended up.
So that's she also, but at the same time, she's been involved in Indigenous Ministries since seminary. We met working on a project together. Her grandparents were in Japanese internment camps, and my grandparents were in residential school. So we had kind of a thing that that we had in common. So both of our grandmas did speaking junkets.
Yep.
Your grandma on internment camp and my grandma on residential school. So we kind of have that. We had that in common, and of course, her mother kind of adopted me into her family, and my parents adopted you into our family. So she lives on the reserve. You're probably there more than I am in my home community.
Yes.
So, but she's also very, very knowledgeable on truth and reconciliation, our initiatives, and so on and so forth. And what she does is she takes care of all of our Indigenous communities in terms of mission, grants writing. If they have any building issues, she does the looky-loo into those kinds of issues, and it kind of frees me up to kind of be having my fingers in several pies around, not only around our diocese, but certainly across Canada and more recently New Zealand. And I was supposed to be in Brazil this week, but I'm very fortunate to be able to work with Hannah, and I can trust her implicitly, and she will also answer when I say, can you look at this email and can you, and I'm gonna dictate what you need to say. So she'll do that in the car. But she is a very good colleague to work with, and I don't know what I would do without her because her skills are amazing. And thank you, Hannah, for coming here.
Thank you. That's a lovely bio.
Thank
Thank you.
Well, the thing is that we also have two other team members, JP, Reverend JP Marquez, and Pastoral Associate Elaine Burnside, or Elaine Healy. I don't know if you know Ed Healy.
Yes.
That's her daughter. That's his daughter. And so we take care of all of the Indigenous communities together. So it's great to work with that team. And I know you know Sam Thomas.
Yes.
Yeah, Sam Thomas also is part of us, and certainly he is kind of steps in here and there whenever we ask him to, and of course our communities love these people. So we're very much a big team. So it's really good to be here in Bolton. The 2.5 hours. We got some business done in that 2.5 hours. A lot of emails were answered in that 2.5 hours, so that's okay. But certainly, it has been a very busy time for us. I don't think we've ever been so busy than we are right now, even before COVID. We're just crazy. It's crazy. We're now booking into February. So it's really good to kind of to calm down, come into circle, and speak together, learn some stuff, and so on and so forth. So I'm going to ask, I guess, what is it that brought you here? I mean, other than your email. What is it? Because here's the thing, that we always set these things up, is that we always want you to be truthful, right? We always want you to ask even a hard question, right? It's okay if you want to ask the question of, why do you sell cheap cigarettes? Or can I get my gas on the reserve? All of these, that sort of thing. No question is stupid. No question is off limits, because this is where we gotta be. We gotta be truthful. We gotta be honest, and of course we have to approach this. I have to approach this with humility and ensuring that I'm on a healing journey, both of us, right? Because we do get the hard questions. Yeah, sometimes they're a little bit, they touch certain places in you, right? And so when that happens, we have to say, okay, this is part of the job. This is part of being vulnerable and telling the truth, because the truth goes both ways, right? Truth and reconciliation goes both ways. At least it should. It should, right? Especially when we're here in this environment, in a church environment here, we're church or community, it has to go both ways, right? So this is why I asked that question. I will also tell you that each and every one of you are indigenous to some place, right? If you go back far enough in your history, you're indigenous to some place, right? And sometimes, I know, depending on how far you are from your rural roots, maybe you're closer to your indigeneity than others. Maybe you work on the land. Maybe your fathers or grandfathers worked on the land, right? And certainly knows the importance of a dollar, certainly knows the importance of what it takes to cultivate something from the dirt up, right? So I always approach people in that way, is that I never like to use the term settler. I don't like to use the term settler, because I think what happens in that instance is that if I use the term settler, call you settler, colonizer, this and that, what it does, it sets up a zero-sum game, right? It sets up a zero-sum game because we don't live in those political those political pundit kind of CNN kind of things where we understand the jargon and this is the job that we do. We don't live there. We are just people trying to live our lives and raise our children and our grandchildren and so on and so forth. And just be productive, be good people, be good Christians, right? And so I don't like to set up those zero-sum games by coming out and saying, settler, colonizer, you're the reason why we suffer. It just doesn't work. It doesn't work. So that's why I'm going to ask you, why are you here?
Do you want me to start?
I don't care.
I knew you would.
We spent a lot of time doing the study of the doctrine of discovery, stolen land, strong hearts, and a lot of us are, and even before that, were very upset about the truth. And we're trying to understand, okay, and I think we want to help. We just don't know what we can do. What are the next things that we need to do in terms of healing and reconciliation?
Mm-hmm. Okay.
That's a tough question.
It is.
Could I ask a question of the question? What were we regarding upset specifically? I just want to know if yours was the same as mine.
Well, I was upset because everything that we're taught in school about Canadian history was twisted, we talked earlier about the lens of 2020 being placed on things that may have happened in the 50s and 60s that Canadians may have thought that they were doing the right things. But finding out that in fact what we were taught wasn't necessarily true. Okay, one of the questions I've been asking at the university is around how are Canadian historians changing their curriculum? In ever since the Truth and Reconciliation report came out, okay, and with the push to have the recommendations implemented and so forth, is the curriculum being changed and so forth, and in what ways? That's what upset me, and I know it upset Jan and I have had long conversations about this, the same way that it's very, very upsetting because, we're proud to be Canadian, but that sort of eats at them. So.
Thank you.
I'll go next. I guess I am a former teacher and started to teach about the residential schools at the elementary level without an awful lot of guidance from a curriculum standpoint, but we had a staff that was interested and librarians that were very good as far as finding books and that sort of thing was concerned. I am a granddaughter of 2 Anglican ministers. I am in too much of a family of educators. And I think that weighs on me as well, is that we sort of double whammy as far as what we did. And I don't think it would be intentional. I do love my family. But it's, what do we do next? What do we do to move forward? And difficult in our parish because we don't have the exposure to the Indigenous the same way as other locations.
So I'm
here because I wanna be more educated about how other people's lifestyles are. I was speaking with a friend today and I was explaining that I was coming here, and they started to say to me, well, ask them why they don't have good water. And I'm like, well, I don't know. And that's why maybe I'm going to this.
Okay.
So, but it's hard when you're trying to not defend, but have a conversation and you're not educated enough about it,
Mhm.
right? Because I see that there is a need, but as Steve said, how do you help?
Mhm.
Or what do you want us to do to help you, right? I've heard stories like, well, we're not allowed to fix the water because something is spiritual and all these things, but I don't know the whole story, so I can't speak to it. And I would like to be able to speak to it to people that have less knowledge of it, or that are ignorant, I guess, to what's going on, right?
We have a cottage up in the South Beach area. We're on the Saugeen Reserve.
Mhm.
And so we've been there about 23 years and we really know a lot of band members. And it runs like a wonderful municipality. They're really competent. Everything is done just what the town is following. People are well educated. And so there's a lot of misconceptions about how well run bands are. So I thought it would be like we've never really thought of ourselves as colonizers because it seemed it's a reciprocal arrangement when you're on leased land. But I guess I'm curious about your perspective.
Okay. That would be a question. Okay, so are you go to Anglican church up in the Bruce?
Well, sometimes we go to that little one, St. Peter's by the Lake.
Oh, St. Peter's by the Lake? Were you there this summer? No. So do you know, you were part of St. Peter's by the Lake, weren't you? Yeah. And it's-
Over 30 people.
Yeah.
So just by the beaches. Yeah, we used to go there. We've been coming here on like Sundays and most Wednesdays.
Okay.
But yeah, the roots, a lot of the people out there. But to me, because we feel like that the only area we really know, our experience is very positive. But we know that there's northern areas that really need a lot of extra resources and things. So, and then we also know that there's Habitat for Humanity builds and so on reserve, and there's programs on reserve. So, like, I guess we just want to know.
Okay. Yeah.
What aren't we saying?
Okay, so let's tackle some of these things before we talk about reconciliation. And I think that's one of the first things we heard about, let's talk about reconciliation and what our next steps. I'm like, well, that's like, okay, step one, step two, right? It just is not like, it just doesn't work that way, right? There isn't a recipe to talk about reconciliation. And I think, Hannah, you can talk about that in a bit, right? About that sort of thing. But let's look at these questions first about water, yes? And about education. Is that okay? We can talk about water and education. We can talk about maybe Indigenous governance and Indigenous community, that sort of thing. And its socioeconomic statuses and so on and so forth. Let's talk about water, because water is a big issue in our communities. We are under a boil water advisory. We've been on a boil water advisory now for the last 5 years or so. And it's kind of an odd thing. I know that I was redoing my kitchen, and I thought, oh, I want one of those refrigerators that they make ice cubes, right? That's what I want, right? And then I was like, yeah, so I'm gonna get I can get my one that makes ice cubes. And then I realized, no, I can't get that because I can't hook up to the water system, right? And I was like, And before that, and as that was happening, every once in a while we have a little thing on our door that says we are in a boil water advisory for all water types. So even for bathing or something like that, we were in a boil water advisory. So, it's hard to live in that way. In our community right now, I'm gonna talk about Oneida first because that's where we're from. We spend about $24,000 every 2 weeks on single-serve water bottles. That is painful. It's painful to see. It's painful that there's nothing that we can, there's nothing that is close to us. I mean, we're working on some sort of solution, but you know that's in the works. But it's getting so painful to see single serve plastics because we can't drink our water.
So can I interject for this? What I don't understand is how can the Canadian government go to a place like Haiti and establish drinking water stations like overnight, and they can't do it here?
Well, what is that? What is the answer to that question? It's a kind of a complicated question, and it's kind of like an accordion, right? When you start to open that, you start to open all of these other things. Because there's so many of our communities that don't have clean water, right? And so we can't open the accordion without all of these other communities falling out. And the way that Indigenous people work together is that we don't like to see somebody getting something before the other, right? And so we have to work that. We have to work on that internally to see how can we work together, because we know that there's Kanchicum, for instance, is a lot worse off than we are, right? And so we also we need to worry about Kanchicum first. So there's those kinds of things, right? There's also the kinds of things where, for instance, now in our community, for instance, there is the Erie pipeline and then there's the Huron pipeline, right? And so the hardest thing about the Huron pipe or the Erie pipeline, which was put in about 20 so years ago, maybe 25 years ago, where Oneida could have hooked up to the Erie pipeline up at Frome, which is like a little crossroad. But that was going to cost them about $7 million, right? You couldn't get $7 million to put that infrastructure in. So now we're getting hooking up into the Huron pipeline, which is going to cost upwards around $200 million, right? As one of my political science professors used to tell me, is you can pay now or you can pay later. This is not a privilege in Canada to have clean water. It's kind of a right, right? Maybe it's even kind of a dignity. There are wells. Okay, there are wells. Yes, I like the question. Can you put wells in? Well, I'll tell you what. Here's the thing: is that the wells? We have wells, but they decided that they would put a dump.
Yeah.
Right down at the edge of the reserve, right? Because all your garbage goes to that dump. Bolton's garbage goes to that dump by my reserve. Right. And so what happens is that there's leachate that goes into the underwater aquifer, right? And so the well water isn't, good. And so we have diseases in our community like scarlet fever. Scarlet fever went out for most of us, right? 100 years ago. Same thing with tuberculosis, right? Still exists in our communities. In fact, I'm test positive for TB all the time. So that's a difficulty, right? And I'm not saying this because I'm looking for this first. sentiment or feeling sorry. I'm just saying that's just the way it is. And this is how we live our lives, right? We live our lives by having, we have a water cooler. I have a water cooler where all my drinking water comes out. To take a shower, still have, we have a regular hot water heater and whatnot, and you can, we have a good water heater, and so we can take a shower and wash dishes and so on and so forth. But we can't drink hot water. But there are some people in the community that can't do any of those things. It's an infrastructure problem, and water is not the only infrastructure problem. Housing is an infrastructure problem that we have in our communities. Every community has that infrastructure problem, every single one. Why? Because we are growing at a massive rate. Our populations are growing, right? So more babies, bigger houses, and we just can't put those houses up fast enough. Used to be we could put those houses pretty fast enough, but the thing is that a lot of times they are kind of substandard, right? Because there's a different building code on reserve than there is for the municipality. So there's a problem. There's also a problem of structural racism, right? There's also a problem of blatantly crime. I'm not talking about, one Indigenous guy and another Indigenous guy fighting and one throwing a rock at the other. I'm talking about crime in the sense of companies coming in to build structures like long-term care and getting kickbacks and sending kickbacks to, the builder has to be approved, not by us, but by the government, right? So one of the things we have are for instance, and I'll give you a for instance from our community, building a long-term care facility. We had, okay, you can build a long-term care facility, here's a license, blah, blah, blah. You can choose these 3 guys, but you're gonna choose this guy if you want it built this year. Right? That sounds kind of fishy, doesn't it? Doesn't that sound kind of fishy? Yeah.
So, when it comes to those decisions, that's a federal decision, so the federal government would say, when it came to long-term care homes, that you can only choose 3 different.
Yeah, it starts at the federal level,
Right.
then it gets kicked down to the provincial level, right? For provincial regulations and so on and so forth, right? So there is it's always getting kicked down, right? It's always getting kicked down. So to answer the question about water and of course infrastructure problems, every community has an envelope according to their treaties. Treaty 7, Treaty 9, all over Canada they have an envelope in which the treaty dollars are in, right? So it's generally how well that you can lobby as a community that will decide, what you can receive or what you can. But then they outlawed lobbying, so we can't have lobbyists. So our councillors lobby, but a lot of our councillors are, frankly, education is a problem, right? Education is a problem in our communities. So you see, it's a plethora of problems, right? Some communities, for instance, like Six Nations, where I work, well, they're the biggest reserve, I hate saying the word reserve too, but they are the biggest reserve in Canada, right? And not only that, but they have a long history with the Crown, even before Canada was a country. So they have they have their big reserve, and they also have the Hallman Tract as well, which is always under contest. And some reserves have resource extraction, right? And that's a thing. Some reserves, also have land claims, land rights cases and whatnot that they have won, or that they're, people watch one thing for, Southeast, yes, in South, yeah. Our community is different. See, we are both the Six Nations people are originally a New York State collection of Indigenous people. Six Nations, Iroquois people are New York State from Albany all the way to Buffalo, right? We call that Solomsis or the Longhouse. We have Seneca, keeper of the Western Door, and the Mohawk keeper of the Eastern Door. So, and of course with Onondaga in the middle, and Oneida around Syracuse, Cayuga around Rochester, Onondaga again right in the middle of Syracuse, and Mohawk and Tuscarora to the side here. So this is our traditional homelands. Now, under the trees of Buffalo Creek, in 1837, 1830 to 1837, and the trees that took place, gradually our community is shrunk like this. Finally, we had nowhere to go. So we bought a parcel of land near London, that's where you had described, on the Anishinaabe lands, and that's where we settled, right? And so each head had to pay $45, and they were told by the Indian agents, whatever you can clear, you can have. Fortunately, my grandfathers and my great grandfather and his brothers were big, strong boys. So they cleared a lot of land along the river, so that's our homestead. So that's the story of how reserves and communities are different, right, across Canada. Some of them have resource extraction, some of them have land rights issues that are slowly being resolved. Some of them have big resources like diamonds and oil and so on and so forth. And they do really well. And some of our communities like ours is not that way. Over here in Six Nations, you have a lot of educated people, big business, large land base of both farming and industrial use, and some reserves just don't have that. So so it's different for every community, right? And their envelopes are varying depending on what treaty they're under. If they have, and the envelopes are comprised of smaller envelopes that are made for certain things. So if you get an envelope for, let's say, neonatal care, right? That envelope of neonatal care resources must be used for neonatal care. And if you don't use it for neonatal care, you have to send it back. Now, if, for instance, a tragedy happens and we have to go pick up deceased loved ones from Thunder Bay, and we use that neonatal care to pay for that, it's fraud. And if that happens, right? If that happens, and you get put into what they call third party. So that means that you have no control over your resources then. So because we have dollars for neonatal care, that doesn't mean that we're wealthy, okay? It means that it's just there. Because here's the thing, is that somewhere, say somewhere in the northern community might get an envelope for $7 million to build a hockey arena in a place where there's ice. So there's a, but at the same time, It's like, okay, we might get $7 million for this hockey arena, we might not build it right away. We might put that $7 million in T-bills and use the T-bill interest for getting the deceased bodies, you know, that sort of thing, right? It's just how that might work. Not in all reserves, but in some communities, that's just survival, right? It's just survival. Not all communities are run well, and some are run very well. So it's a difference, and we read in a lot of it is you know what it is, honestly? Also, what honestly is neglect. That's what it is, neglect. You stay in this community, you don't really care what's going on there. We might come in once in a while, but it's neglect. And there is a whole psychology around that neglect. You might say, oh, the community, the reserve, right? Oh, the reserve. Here's the thing, you guys, the reserve is not normal. It's not normal to live on a reserve.
Also, like it's some community, isn't it? Just like say, I don't know, like you're saying that some little across the country,
Here's a difference though.
little
Right, but here's the difference. You can, if you live in that little community, you can leave that community anytime you want to. We had to get permission to leave that community. Yeah.
Are the reserves structured based on the Indian Act, or what structured the reservations as far as, they're different again in every province,
Yeah,
aren't they?
right. Well, they're different by treaties. You know, first of all, they're different by the treaties.
Right.
But everyone is governed by the Indian Act.
So if they could ever get rid of the Indian Act, then maybe things would be restructured.
Oh my gosh.
That's a big
You know, here's the thing, is, okay, I mean, it's a fair question, When I say, oh my gosh, it's like, gosh, and then the reason why I say that is because it sounds really great to get rid of the Indian Act, right? It sounds really, holy smacks, I say that because I would be scared to lose the Indian Act.
Really?
Yes, I would be scared to lose it. We don't know how to function without it.
Oh, really? Because I always thought everybody thought it was such a
It is a bad thing, it absolutely is a bad thing, but all of us suffer from a thing called Stockholm Syndrome. Right? We don't know what we would do with ourselves without this Indian Act. It's a low down dirty shame, but it's just the way it is. I mean, I'm being truthful, and I know that you're being truthful. And it's just like
and I never would have thought, I would have never heard that. That just blows me away, because I always thought, well, if we could restructure everything somehow, that would be a way to start.
So here's the thing, right? Here's the thing, and just to add to this oeuvre question, is that our communities had leadership, traditional leadership, right? Based on what our responsibilities were. So for instance, in our community, our leadership is based on our clans. So our clans, each of our clans has responsibilities. Each of our clans has a clan mother and a chief and a sub-chief, right? And this is how they make the decisions. So each family, like there are 3 families, for instance, in the bear clan, 3 families in the turtle clan, and 3 families in the wolf clan. So that's how checks and balances occurred, right? Is through the clan system. Responsibilities were in the clan system. Bear clans had a responsibility. Turtle clan has a responsibility. Wolf clan had a responsibility. The chiefs all came together to discuss these responsibilities. It would filter down to the families and to the people, right? The clan mothers were kind of the speakers of the house, so to speak, right? They were speakers of the house without really speaking, because they just sat there looking very, very bossy and grim. I say that because my mother is a hereditary clan. But so, and what happened with the Indian Act is that it removed those traditional ways of leadership. And it installed a really foreign way of leadership. And I don't know if you guys noticed this, and maybe you do have, I don't know if you've noticed that it seems to me, more often than not, it's really wealthy people that get the power. I don't know if you noticed that? Notice that? And I don't know if you noticed this, but just because you're wealthy, it doesn't always mean you're smart. I don't know if you watch Fox News. You watch Fox News? Yeah, okay.
Or
yeah.
on it.
Yeah, I get it.
Yeah.
Or on it.
Right. Wow, yeah, Ron DeSantis.
Was there another issue in that, as you mentioned, clan mothers?
Mhm.
So basically, Indigenous clans were run through a matriarchal,
Yes.
as opposed to Western, it's patriarchal.
Yes,
So all of a sudden, it completely changes everything.
yes, it does, and Hannah is, she teaches in governance, in Indigenous governance, ways of governing as well, and other forms of governance, so that really makes a difference. Matriarchal run leadership really makes a difference, because they have, women have very specific roles, within the community, right? We call it, for us, for our Indigenous folks, we say, we have seed bearer, this is biological by the way, seed bearer and life carrier, right? It means that we have specific biological roles. That doesn't mean though that there isn't other kinds of roles to be had. Just because your body is a seed carrier and your body is a life carrier, that doesn't mean that that you have to live up to that particular biological role, but it does mean that that's how you function. And I say that because it comes it's a biological factor, but it's not the biological factor that you might think. Because the biological factor that you might think is a patriarchal biological factor, which is that, oh, you're a woman? Oh, then you have to stay in the home. You can't really speak, right? And your job is to have babies. And that's it. That's a patriarchal structure, right? Patriarchal structure says, you are a caregiver in this way. When you say caregiver, it's different. It's not just about your children, but it's about the community as well. Your role as a mother does not stop with your own children, right? And it goes back to some of our ancient narratives of Diocese, who was called in our communities, Six Nations with the Shunning folks, is the mother of nations. She's the mother of nations because she is the one who taught, cultivated, raised chiefs and warriors. How did she do that? By being mother. And not just any mother, by being a kind of mother that is strict, smart, sharp, what we call soft front, strong back, right? So yes, matriarchal ways of leadership and of cultivation of leadership. Yeah, so where was I now? Oh, education. I want to talk a little bit about education, right? Well, that's...
Are you going to talk at all about what the government forced the communities to do with their governing councils? And how the government only recognizes those councils in
Yes,
terms of
the
community
government, yes,
decision-making?
right, and okay. So here's the thing, and I'll come draw back to our community again. So we have our traditional communities, or our traditional ways of leadership, and sovereignty and governance is based on our traditional ways of understanding how leadership works in terms of representation, right? Remember, we are represented in our clans. We are represented by clan mothers and chiefs, and also faith keepers, right? So there's representation for each voice to be heard, right? They brought in the elected system, Indian Act, they wrote this into the Indian Act to bring the elected system. So it's very much like a Herodian sense. If you know Herod who was like a puppet king, this is how this elected system began. And really, what happened is that, you're elected leader, so you get paid, and so you're going to also get lots of perks, and that started social stratification as well, right? Social stratification, where we start to recognize there are folks in our communities that have more, and those folks that have more are going to be part of the elected council. And there's jokes galore on TikTok about that. So, but that is certainly a reality that we don't have our traditional ways of governing anymore. And I say that knowing that even so that is so, we still maintain traditional councils. We still maintain that. But in a perfect world, in my opinion, in a perfect world, that is how we would still be governing. And if they needed an administration, somebody who's going to run the administration and understand all of these treaties and acts and so on and so forth, well, maybe that's an elected person's responsibility. But anyway, we still have our traditional leadership still intact, but they don't function in the way that they used to.
So what would it take to allow them to function the way they used to?
Is that a possibility? I guess everything is possible. But right now, the powers that be, the true colonizers, the powers that be, they can come in and extract what they need, what they want, if they can divide and conquer. Wet'suwet'en is the perfect example. You had traditional leadership pitted against elected leadership. That becomes an internal struggle. The government can then say, until you guys figure this out. Yeah.
It's not all going to be part of the reconciliation. If we can't allow the traditional governance because we want all the elected, then we're not really understanding or.
We can't do it without any kind of understanding of land, right? And that's the hard thing. That's the hard thing. We have to have an understanding of land. And I'm going to say this, a spiritual understanding of land. Not as land to be bought and sold. One of the things that I appreciate, especially coming to rural folks, and a lot of them say, why would you want to go to see rural folks? In rural churches and so on and so forth. Other than the fact that sometimes the sandwiches aren't that good. Here's the thing. The baking is, sandwiches are they're small, that's the thing, they're small. But no, really, here's the thing is that I think folks who have farms in their families kind of understand this a little bit better. The idea of legacy. And the idea that I'm just going to use this until my children take it over and my grandchildren take it over, right? And so they understand that way. And Indigenous folks are similar, but there's just a little bit more communal, maybe, right? It's held in common rather than by families, right? So there are some things that can come together. Some things are a little bit different. But there's a spiritual understanding of land that we are connected to. And we have to understand that we are connected to these things. And so I think I think our Indigenous peoples, they kind of lose that too. they kind of lose that idea too. Because right now, the way that they are dealing with land is through court, is through the idea of seeing it as a thing. And how do we break that apart? How do we deconstruct that notion of land as thing, right? And as land as part of your power structure. And that's not just a thing that Indigenous people have to do, but it's also a thing that you have to do, is to loosen that idea that land is part of your power structure. Land is your asset. No, it's not. It's your mother. It's your food. It's your sustenance. When I was in New Zealand, I met a wonderful. She is just incredible. She's a Dene, which is from Navajo land, right? And she was telling a story about how she used to live with her grandmother, and her grandmother says, bring the food, and let's go outside and we'll eat lunch. So she says, bring the blanket. So she gets the blanket, she puts it down. And her grandmother just sits there, and they're sitting there, and they're not talking, they're just sitting there, and she's kind of going, just kind of like, what are we doing, actually? And she says, we're going to have lunch now. And she says, but we have a perfectly good table inside. Why are we sitting out here? It's not like we're having a picnic. I mean, we're just outside out in the front yard. And the grandmother said, sometimes it's good to sit on your mother's lap, right? So there was a story about the spiritual connection that the grandmother had for the land and how she's passing it on to her very modern granddaughter, right? So her granddaughter tells that story and how it changed her life and how she looks at her relationship with nature and the land. And now she's a sheep farmer. She's also a priest, but she's a sheep farmer, right? New Zealand is great because they're sheep farmers, a lot of sheep farmers. So it was a very good kind of bring us to this notion that we are part of the land. And I will say this, is that October 7th changed our lives. It changed our lives, right? What happened in Israel. It put us into a post-modern cycle. And I say that this way, because right now you will hear pundits saying, this is a fight between two indigeneities, the Israelis and the Palestinians. I've always been pro-Palestinian, obviously, because I'm Indigenous. Have you ever heard of the Al-Nakba? Al-Nakba in Palestine.
Yes.
Yes. Al-Nakba. Settlers came with the IDF, the Israeli Defense Force, and basically took the land in such a way that it was legislated, in such a way that they could say, okay, we're just going to do this right now, just put your keys in your pocket and go over there for a second and we'll work this out when we get our land. Palestinians left their homes, put the keys in their pockets, and their keys are still in their pockets. And there's nothing worse than seeing a 70-year-old little Palestinian woman and her husband crying because they still have the keys to their house hanging in a chain around their neck. And say, we've not been home since. So I've been pro-Palestinian. I've been to, when I go to Israel, I don't go to the trip, I'm not the guy who wears the t-shirt that says, Shalom, y'all! I'm not that person that's going to, get on a big bus and get out on the holy sites and that's where Jesus was born. No, it's, I get it. A little town of Bethlehem is full of people who are lost, Palestinians who are lost. And some of the really strong people who are working for peace, Palestinians who are working for peace, right above them, there's an organization called WIAM. And they are a Christian Palestinian organization, and they want to make sure that, you know, they kind of take care of a lot of Palestinian villages. And right above that, right above their kind of headquarters here is a turret, a tower along the wall. It's just an amazing thing. Is it a tale of two indigenities? I struggle with that. Why? Because Israel signed away their indigeneity when they got into bed with France and Britain and the US to take the land away from these other folks that shared the land for millennia. It's hard. What they're trying to work this, you know, you've heard of the two-state solution, right? Here's the thing about that. There are so many rabbis in Israel and out here, outside of Israel, who say Zionism, tell us what they say about Zionism.
Oh, Zionism is not Judaism.
Yeah, Zionism is not Judaism, right? Because Judaism has a theology of land. They do have a theology of land. And if you read Leviticus, one of my favorite books, by the way, talks about Jubilee, right? Jubilee is how do we recycle to make sure that everybody gets access to this land, that if someone who has been disenfranchised can get their land back if they've lost it through, you know, a poor harvest, right? Jubilee, where it changes over from the one who has more to the one who has less. The last shall become first, and the first shall become last. That principle is written in Leviticus. Jubilee. There's some gold in some scripture. I'll tell you right now. Right? And so, of course, Palestinians have also a theology of land. Right? Whether you're a Christian Palestinian or a Muslim Palestinian, you have the concept of Ummah, right? Where you share within your community. If you have more, you have less. These are things that are theologically and spiritually written into their sacred ways of knowing and being. Now, could you imagine how that two-state solution would have come if it had come together with holy people, with leaders that were traditional leaders, come together and say, this is how we are going to share this land. This is how we are going to work together. They could have brought in some Haudenosaunee people and talked about the Turo, right? The Turo welcome. This is how we are on this path together. But it didn't happen that way. Instead, the biggest colonizer, I'm going to say it this time, in the world, and I say colonizer because they have a history of expansionism. Britain's expansionism. You know how some people just love Winston Churchill, right? Expansionism. It was about expansionism. Let's expand. Let's make sure that we have all of our colonies producing, whether it's sapphires from India or Sri Lanka, tea from India, Sri Lanka, whether it's coffee from Jamaica and the Caribbean, whether it's timber and furs from North America, right? Expansionism for monetary and economic gain wrote and obviously I'm abbreviating all of this, came together to support Israel's colonizing of the West Bank of Gaza, Jerusalem, the Holy Land. And it's hard because they came to a place to be safe. The average Israeli person came to a place where they could be Jewish and not worry about Holocaust and any of those violent ways of knowing and being. But now, it didn't happen that way. So now you have whole villages that don't have any men in them, because they're all in Israeli jail. You have 10-year-old boys who throw rocks at the tanks going through, and they're picked up, and they go to jail, and they're there for months at a time. You have hospitals in Jerusalem that Palestinians could go to, but they're not allowed. You have license plates, one yellow, one white, one marking out who's Palestinian and who is Israeli. You have thick corridors of steel and spikes that say, it's too late, you can't come in. My sister is over there in the hospital, sorry. Like a Lutheran hospital where they, especially where they serve specifically Palestinian people. So it's really difficult to see how, or I should say, it's easy to see how colonizing tendencies exist in the world, in Canada and abroad, but it's really difficult to go back and change those types of things. What would it take for Netanyahu to say, man, I'm up? He's dead. Because now Israeli people are saying, you brought this on with these crazy policies. Well, some Israelis are saying that, some, but that's the thing, is that what would it take now to create that peace? We have to go back. It's going to be a long time, again, because folks like, and I'm not saying for a second that terrorist organizations or any like Hamas is in their right mind. They are not in their right mind, but it's a psychosis. There's a psychosis going on in the minds of these people. And that psychosis is going back to, like what I said about reservations. It's not normal. It's not normal to have your hope taken away from you like that. And for us as Indigenous people, our hopes were in our legacy, just like your legacies, in land, in having babies, and living productive lives, and living lives in community. How could that hope be taken away so fast? That hope is taken away. They fall into something else to fill that hole, like drugs and alcohol.
So if reserves are obliterated, what would take their place?
It's not reserves that can be obliterated, because that's kind of like the Indian Act now, right?
Yeah.
Right? It's kind of like the Indian Act now. That's home now, right?
Right.
That's home. But I think what it needs to be, Hannah, I want you to explain this a little bit about the difference between equality and equity. Can you do that? I know, I'm saying that because, because she teaches this, right? So maybe just talk about like the ideas of equity and the betterment of Indigenous people and or people of color, right? And what that means and how.
Could I just ask something before that? You said earlier, just by way of explaining the Palestinian and the Israeli situation, that they, not we, have sacred ways of knowing and being. And in that moment, I began to feel hopeless because it is so different from the white perspective. Like when those dramatic changes need to occur within me, and you've lived with it for generations and passed it on in the oral tradition, how do we ever come to make the needed changes?
Resurgence.
Pardon me?
Resurgence. We can say, oh, well, I want to reconcile. Let's sit and talk about reconciliation. Okay, a little difficult because reconciliation is based on people coming together that are on an equitable place, right? We come from an equitable place where we're kind of level. That's not happening. We're not level. No, we're not. But resurgence, when I say resurgence, that means that our folks, my folks, my indigenous people, have to continue to resurge in their indigenous ways of knowing and being, coming back to who they are, eating indigenous foods, corn, beans, and squash, and deer, eating those things, coming because we're sick with diabetes, right? We're eating a lot of. It used to be we ran on feast famine. Now it's just feast, all on McDonald's, which I could really use right now. So the resurgence is this resurgence for our people, right? To go back to their traditional ways, even the traditional ways of raising family. There's a lot of literature out there that's emerging about resurgence of being a father in the indigenous way. How do I raise my children as an indigenous man, right? Because indigenous men suffer in these situations. Look at Hamas, right? That's an example of how indigenous men suffer and what will they do when their hope is taken up. When their hope is taken, there's a psychosis that develops. It's the same way with our indigenous people, right? So I'm happy to have these ideas of resurgence coming up in our communities with men, with women, with children, right? Elders coming back to leave their canes and their walkers behind, to come back and take their rightful place as valued, contributive members of our community. And that's a project that I love doing, is bringing elders back into community and having their wisdom shared. Again, talking about land and how we share land and how we use land, being stewards of the land, but not only that, stewards of the land, but also being partners with people who have lands, are non-indigenous people who are working for lands and working on lands and have that and ecologists and environmentalists and so on, working on those types of things. Resurgence there. Resurgence in culture and language. Again, our culture is really predicated upon how we speak our language. We know that there is not going to be a fluency as there was from 100 years ago, but as my mother, who is a language teacher and consultant, she calls it the new fluency, because she knows we can't go back. So what are the things that we can keep, right? She's also a curator of language, so we can have this idea of new fluency, because she feels, she writes about, that pronunciation, for instance, is so critical to keeping that fluency, even if it's a new fluency. So she curates the language, and she does that by YouTube. She has a YouTube channel. She has a podcast, right? And we joke with my mother, said, "Oh, Mom, you want to have a podcast? You're going to be YouTube famous. You're going to be famous, right?" And we laugh about it because she must have about maybe 600 subscribers, maybe 300 subscribers. But why she does that is because she creates a record of people having conversations. Conversational Oneida, this is what she's recording. So we can go back and see this is the way that we spoke in conversation. Even if we were to lose it completely, you would have those curated records. I'm telling you, I wish I was as smart as my mother was. But I'm trying, maybe I'll get there. But this is a resurgence, right? Resurgence. Now, where can you resurge? Well, that's your homework, you guys. For you to be people who are on the resurgence. And you know what? You know where the best place to have resurgence? Here. Church. Right? Those clubs like Lions Club or any of those clubs that you might belong to, Optimist Club, those kinds of things. Girl Guides, that sort of thing, where you become community. That's where you resurge. And here, especially when you talk about church, there are so many things that are taught in a place like, in a faith community like this, it's about ethics, about community. Read Acts 2. Seriously, go home and, I know you bring your Bible to church on Sundays, right? Okay, but try it, try it. Acts 2, right? Acts 2 church. They fed each other, they took care of each other, and day by day, they became followers. Day by day, they made sure that, well, they sold things and they took the proceeds and made sure that everybody had enough. That's Acts 2. That's not me. That's Acts 2. That's kind of my version, you know, the R-E-R-A-N. So that's where you research here, is to really pay attention to those kinds of teachings. The liturgy is the work of the people, right? That's you guys. We go and have Eucharist, we collect each other, we collect. We are fed with the sacrament of the Word. We hear those teachings. We partake of the body and blood, which is, the way I talk to you about it, is good medicine. Good medicine to renew us, to be the hands and feet of Jesus, to bring the kingdom into place, right? We get that nourishment, and then finally, we get sent to do those things. So clear in the Great Thanksgiving at Eucharist. The way that God has come into the world, the ethics that he sought from these people, the freedom that he sought for these people, Jesus coming to save us from of our own proclivity and humanity, but also to bring in this idea of the kingdom, where someone who sacrificed for you. The meal, the going to the cross, the death of his victory over death. Anamnesis, the memory of God and Jesus in the world. The epiclesis, the calling of the Holy Spirit, so that we can do our jobs. That's a resurgence. I mean, I would love to talk about a resurgence at the Maple Leafs game. Not going to happen, I'm afraid.
Next year.
It's always next year.
Yeah, so that's what I mean, is being in this community is a resurgence. You being in this community, learning from each other, talking with each other, occasionally having special guests and having those conversations with each other is a resurgence. And churches have to be that place of resurgence, of spiritual resurgence. Right? It teaches us so many things. It teaches us that it's okay to, what church teaches us, and it should teach us, is that it's okay to be wrong. Right? Because when you're wrong, there's always an opportunity to turn around and be right, or to learn. It teaches us that it's okay, that you are forgiven. So I mean, look, I'm giving a sermon here.
That's a good one.
Taking notes for Sunday.
But this is a place of resurgence. Don't be afraid to resurge in your Christian culture, in your Christian belief. Because that Christian belief, that way of being ethical, of living in community, is going to affect the way that you raise your children and grandchildren, hopefully. It's also gonna change the way that you vote. Because you're gonna look for reasons to vote for someone for good environmental ethics, for good social ethics, right? You're gonna be influenced to do some of that learning and walking with, and the other organizations as well. So I think that we talk about things that you can do, right? Or it talks about how you break that cycle even within yourself, is to resurge of the good things that you are learning in these organizations, including church. There is, get more stuff in here and in here do that, you always have stuff in here, right? Knowledge, wisdom, right? And so I think that for me, that's a key. I want folks, I am a priest, I serve non-Indigenous communities, Indigenous communities, speak to a lot of folks, and I just live to the promise, live into that promise, right? I mean, when Martin Luther King spoke about, I have a dream, he didn't say, let's abolish all the government, let us defund the police. It was never like that. It was, no, I have a dream, not just for me, but for our children, your children, my children, little black children, little white children playing together. It was about, no, here's the thing, you have the declaration, you have this document where all men are created equal, live up to it. Live up to that promise. That's what it was about. That's what civil rights was about, right? It's not about us versus them. It's not about Indigenous versus non-Indigenous. It was not about Indigenous versus settler or colonizer. It was live up to the promises that you had, that you lived for, the hope that you lived for when your ancestors got here. That's all it is, right? That's all it is. I don't want to get too pithy or banal, but it is a from me to me kind of situation. It's not easy, I know, but I'm going to encourage you to take these things that you learn and let it change you. It's okay to say, I used to believe this, but I've learned, and now I believe this. I think a lot of our problem sometimes is that we're so afraid to be wrong. You know, we want to be right. And I'm more right than you are, sir. Right? Right?
It is the Anglican way.
So I think that if we can take that risk to be wrong, then we can receive the gifts of the other easier. We can certainly give to other without the power behind it, without some sort of power play behind it. We can give and we can receive if we take the risk. Yeah. So I don't know if that was helpful. I'm not sure if that's what you wanted to hear at this late in the evening. If there's any other things that you want to talk about or hear or whatever. I'm not a good singer, so please don't ask me to sing. Or a good dancer either. Yes.
In reading, for example, I read the Wilson Riggles book, and I found it very interesting. Just all the various sort of, I guess, ways of various governances in the Indigenous communities. Are there any other books that people should be reading to know a bit more? Like we stumble across ourselves trying to know anything. You know, is there a reading list you could suggest?
I'm going to suggest that one of the readings that you have to do is anything by Lee Miracle.
Lee Miracle?
Yeah. Right, she's,
Write that down.
yeah. Lee Miracle. Yeah. I guess this is on paper as well. Yeah, she's a good writer. Who else would you say? Like it's not necessarily Indigenous, but about equality and governance politics.
Putting me on the spot with that.
Yeah.
I could come up with a book list and send it to you later, but I don't know if I can come up with it on the top of my head.
That one from Lenny.
Oh, yeah, Lenny Duncan is a Lutheran pastor in the States, and he's a black man, and he wrote this book called Dear Church, and I can't remember what the subtitle was, but it's called Dear Church, and he talks about, he basically talks about the need for he says says the white church, the need for the white church to find a different way of engaging in modern society, and the need for the need for the white church to acknowledge a history that it's had with people of color, particularly in his context with Black people, but also to find a way to walk forward with their African American brothers and sisters. And it is good. I mean, he does use some colorful language, so if you're not into that, that might not be the best one. But it is an excellent book.
Yeah, and it just gets you, again, it's a heuristic, it gets you thinking about other things as well. Probably The Inconvenient Indian, I think everybody knows about that book, right? So that's always a good read. One of the, I'll talk a little bit, first of all, Lee Miracle, she has this concept of the knower's chair, right? And she writes about, like, she says, you guys think you know everything, right? She says, it's like you have some sort of chair that you sit in, and it gives you that power to just talk to everybody. Like, they don't know anything, but you know everything. And she's very matter of fact about things, but at the same time, it kind of makes you go, okay. So all of these books the books that we mentioned are those kinds of books. I can speak sweetly and nicely, but not everybody speaks sweetly and nicely, I'll tell you that. But that's okay. That's okay. I guess another book was, I think it's like 101 Things About the Indian Act That You Were Afraid to Ask. That one is a good one. And Julia Raybold's book is a good one. We were supposed to do a Bible or a book study on that. We have to get on that. Wild Canoe is an interesting read as well. Right?
Yes.
Yeah. So give him a look.
Yeah.
Let's see. There's a book called Nigel, a book by an author named Nigel Bigger, and it's a book on I think it's just called Colonialism, and it's an interesting book because he talks as colonialism is a good thing.
Is it what?
Is a good thing. Colonialism is a good thing, but it's a good read because it gets your mind working in a different way to see, like, oh, okay. How many people know Jordan Peterson? You know Jordan Peterson? No? You know Ben Shapiro? Okay. Candace Owens? Okay. Don, you know Jordan Peterson?
Oh, yeah.
Love Jordan Peterson, love to hate him. Here's the thing about those people like Jordan Peterson. You need to be listening to these folks like Jordan Peterson and to these conservative right-wing folks. I know it's hard. It's hard, but we have to be listening to them and to say, what is going on here? Because we have to find ways in which to say, I see where you're coming from, but that's not exactly ethical. That's not exactly, that's not exactly what that means, right? So we have to pay attention. I mean, I watch Fox News more than I watch CNN. Why? It's not only entertainment, but it's also a way to sharpen, it certainly sharpens, what is going on out there in the world. And to say, that's not quite right. That's not quite right. And to say, sometimes it's like, how will I say this? Maybe what I'm saying, maybe I'm not getting clear about this. Maybe I have to do this. So please, don't be afraid to read some of those other things and listen to other things as well. There was a book called Disrobing. Oh gosh, it's an old one. Disrobing the Aboriginal Industry, I think.
Yes.
Yeah, that's also a good one, and not in a way that you would think, but it does give you a perspective on how people learned people actually think and how they kind of spread this notion of really, really underhanded supremacy, white supremacy. I think that's all I'll say about that, because I'll let you find that out yourself, what that's about. But yeah, any other questions or yes?
How do you mix Christianity with your basic roots?
Oh, I love that question. Absolutely, I do. It's okay. It takes a lot of healing. It's a healing thing for me. It's also about wanting to walk with people. Wanting to walk with people that kind of gives me a kind of humility to say there's something out there bigger than I am. So I have to be really conscious of that. And then when I walk with humility, or I sometimes attempt to walk with humility, not always. Sometimes I fight it. But it's really important to be able to want to. I guess it's important to at least have that desire to walk with people, right? And I can't walk with people if I hold my identity to myself, right? I can't walk with people if I'm not having a conversation with someone who sees something differently, which is why I say read those other things, because you can always learn more about yourself, right? And so theologically and spiritually, my Christian ways and my Indigenous ways speak to each other, right? So when I put things together, they're always speaking to one another. I call this dialogical theology, right? It's not a way to talk. I don't like to use the word syncretism or pluralism, but I like to use dialogical theology where we're never settling, you guys. We are walking together. We're sojourning, settler to sojourner. That's where I want to be. So I want to be a sojourner to walk with people who think differently than I do. And that was always our way. That was always our way. A long time ago, our hardcore traditional leaders, it is said, our hardcore traditional leaders knew the scripture just as well as the priest, because they had to. Because they felt that scripture was going to guide them to making good decisions. Well, you see how that worked out, right? but that was the premise of it, is that when priests speak about scripture and the tenets of what they believe, it was something that they could get on board with, because we believed those similar things, maybe different ways. It was different, but we believed in community. We lived an Acts 2 kind of life. We believe that peace, love, mercy, forgiveness, compassion, all those things that Jesus stood for, all of Jesus' teachings, are the same things that we were taught by our prophets, namely the peacemaker. So all of those kind of had this dialogue together. There's another article by Elizabeth Elborn who talked about Anglicanism, for instance, and the Six Nations, right? And how it wasn't a melding together, but it certainly was dialogical. In fact, in the Mohawk Chapel, one side here is the peacemaker, the other side is Jesus, right? And I stand in the middle of those at the chapel and always talk about the dialogical relationship that my tradition has with Christianity, and how all of that ways of knowing and being Christian, ways of knowing and being Haudenosaunee kind of work together. And there's always a path, right? And always kind of a two-road path. There's a lot of complicated question to answer. Oh, I hope that wasn't a long, complicated answer. But I mean, there's no examples of it everywhere in my life, right? Of how this is working out, from the way that I give thanks in the morning to the way that I see the Eucharist, for instance, as good medicine, as nourishment. The way that I see how we use tobacco, how we use our sacred medicines. So all of those dialogues are happening all at once. It gets very busy up here sometimes.
You know we could keep you here all night.
Yeah.
She's got a long drive.
I just want to say, on behalf of all of us here tonight, and particularly our little social justice committee, we are so thrilled to have you here. And Hannah, thank you for coming along as well. I think the one thing I learned is that we're a long way from reconciliation, and it's a really complex. I think you've really enhanced our understanding by providing a lot of insights and to me, I'm going to use the term the ugly reality of some of the things that are still there. They're going to have to be addressed. But we do want to thank you immensely for making the trek here and for sharing with us. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you so much.
Our appreciation.
McDonald's.
I would think so. I'm finally 50, yes.
And I was just gonna say, we can make sure that you get a book list.
That would be much appreciated.
I'll make sure we get
Yeah.
a list.
On the way home.
If there's anything else, any other questions, please,
There's coffee and sweets.
oh,
You know something to tide you over and
so, you're right, reconciliation is, I always say it's reconciliation, words like reconciliation, decolonization, those kinds of words. They're like the kingdom, they're both here and not yet, right? And so we always have to be working toward and looking toward, because all it takes in your hearts is some hope. Don't lose hope, don't lose hope. Don't lose hope, because you have a group around you that are going to lift you up into, how do I make my way through those things, and how do I teach the folks that are going to come after me, right? It's very important to not lose hope. If I stayed in a state of losing hope, so certainly I wouldn't be here. But there's hope in Jesus. Is about hope. The first shall become last, the last shall become first. Love others as I have loved you. Right? All those teachings are there to give us hope. For God so loved the world, right? That He gave His only begotten Son. It is there for us. So let's take it. Let's look at those a little closer. So thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah.